Hi, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I don't know if I'm part of the sum of the favorite people that Sammuel mentioned, but we'll continue. So my name is Sammuel Kummary, Sam. For those of you who attended the previous community event, I'm the reigning champion of the Mojaloop trivia tournament. And thanks, I want to thank the Mojaloop Foundation again for not having the tournament this time, so that I can call myself the reigning champion for another quarter. All right. So Mojaloop 3 PPI. Today we'll look at the overview of the third-party feature, a brief look at the history and background, where we are with the functionality now, and then we'll cover a technical aspect, one of the best practices standards that came out of the 3 PPI team, the API snippets, and then we'll look at the future roadmap. First, we'll start with the team. Thanks to the team, you'll see contributors from various organizations. Some of them are focused full-time on this project, and others are supportive and offer consultative collaboration or support. Thanks to the team we are here. Just a brief timeline here. We are in the phase 3 of this project. Phase 1, we had the initial proof of concept. And then phase 2, we had the minimum viable product. MVP as a goal. We'll look at a little bit detail, the outcomes and goals of each of the phases. Currently, we are in the phase 3 where we want to make sure that it is ready for adoption by production systems. So I won't go into the detail, but the initial phase was about developing a proof of concept. There were a lot of moving parts, and accordingly, our goal was to just develop some designs, scaffolding, and some APIs to get the third-party functionality and a proof of concept to demonstrate third-party linking and transfers using mocked services, but also make sure that we have the designs for later stages. In the MVP phase, actually the team over-delivered in phase 1. And before phase 2, we had some of the services, not mocked ones, but real services for third-party functionality. And MVP, we started off by offering support, not just for happy path scenarios, but error scenarios. And our goal was to develop a version 0.1 of the third-party API, provide a consent oracle lookup service support for PISP, authentication services, and then integration and end-to-end tests. Some general information here. Want to make sure that we have this in our deck so that when you look at it later, you can access some of the links here. You have the links to the third-party API spec. For anyone who wants to closely follow the project, there is the last link there. You can access the issues that are currently in progress that the team is working on, what the status is. These issues are very detailed. They contain the acceptance criteria, comments, and things like that. Before going further on this, I want to just show a couple of minutes of the third-party transfer and then continue with the rest of the presentation. Please allow me to access from YouTube. I'll see if I can share.
Transfers screen. So here we go, and we can enter in a phone number of the person that we want to receive the funds. So in this case, it's someone in India with an odd looking number. And we've done, I'll just pause it there actually. We've done a party lookup behind the scenes. We found Alice Alpaca Thanks, Kevin, for that demo name. Very nice. And then now we can enter in how much we want them to receive. So $18 US in this example. And then we can go ahead and initiate the third-party transaction request is what's happening here. So I'll just pause it again. So what's happening behind the scenes between those two screens is we've sent the request to the DFSP, and then they've said, all good, this looks fine to me. You know, I know this consent ID you've registered earlier. This person has funds available in their account. Then they went behind the scenes and did a quote request between their DFS themselves, their DFSP, and Alice Alpaca's DFSP. And that quote response came back, and then they sent that back to the PASP to go and confirm with their user, and then to sign the transaction using their FIDO private key. So that's what's happening here. They're signing the transaction, and then the transaction was successful. So, like I said, this.
Thanks for that, Lewis. So let's go back to the presentation for a bit. So where are we now? So we just looked at the demo. Let me share it back again. So we started off with the goals for phase 3, these goals, productionizing and profiling third-party services, making sure we have a third-party adapter developed and released. We develop integration guides for DFSPs and PISPs, and then payment manager to be included in the third-party flows. We had some bonus goals as well, support for ISO 20022, some center of excellence kind of things, documentation, starter kits. And we now have a couple of other things as well to extend third-party functionality for bulk transfers and others that Michael will talk about during the roadmap. So what were we able to do during this PI? So the first one, we were able to cover this. We were able to productionize and improve the quality of the third-party services. Excuse me. Hope this is better now. So there are two ways we wanted to define success. Is there an implementer who has deployed third-party features? End-to-end testing of third-party features. I think the second one, the minimum goal we had, end-to-end testing of third-party features. So we still are working on the core connectors that are part of Payment Manager, but we have the end-to-end test done, and these are part of Mojaloop releases. So with Mojaloop release v13.10, we have the third-party services available out of the box, but they need to be configured to be deployed, and we can use third-party functionality. So where are we with the third-party features? So we have a version 1.0 of the third-party API published. Third-party initial implementation and end-to-end tests are done. As I mentioned, they are now included in Mojaloop release. So anyone who wants to adopt Mojaloop third-party functionality now, they can get version 13.10 of Mojaloop, or later we have another patch release as well. And they'll be able to take advantage of the third-party features to deploy in test QA, and then see if third-party functionality fits their use case, and then extend and customize that. So we are working on developing an adapter for GSP API, but the hope is that it also sets a template for any third-party implementer to use it and then customize it as a connector for their own API as well. So that is currently in progress. Going into a little bit more detail, as part of productionizing, we have the third-party Helm charts validated as part of Mojaloop deployment in dev and QA environments. We have the end-to-end tests that are developed in testing toolkit to run against these deployed services, and we have a 100% pass rate on those. In fact, these are also run every time we deploy Mojaloop now, and they can be automated as well as part of infrastructure as code and other scenarios. On the adapter side of things, we have a change request done to have a third-party adapter developed, and this has been approved by the third-party SIG. Some technical debt on payment manager to reconcile a couple of components. One is called Mojaloop connector, and we have the SDK scheme adapter. So that's a lot of work, not glamorous, not fancy, but still needed to bring services to production quality. So that is done. And then the last B4 and B5 items are the ones that we want to work on from now on. Connectors for third-party implementers and FSP implementers. So I have a couple of component diagrams which capture that thinking as well. So as I mentioned, if anyone is interested in tracking the progress closely, we have a Mojaloop project, and we use ZenHub to track the issues, and we can go there anytime and review the progress there. So a lot of work to productionize the services, validating the charts, fixing bugs. A lot of work was done in making sure that the API and implementation are in sync. That wasn't the case before this phase. So the team had to work hard on that to get that done. Before we move into the next part, I'd like to show another small video. So Kevin from the PISP team made this video to show that we have good coverage now and end-to-end tests. So let me see if I can go back to the browser.
There's still a bit of duct tape kind of holding that together behind the scenes, but hopefully you get a feel for.
That's not the video I wanted to share.
Hi, I'm Tony Alisea, and welcome to the first 3.5 hours of my course, Understanding HTML.
So this is the
Here
video.
I have
Thanks,
Mojaloop and our third-party services running in our integration test harness.
Just give me one
This
moment.
test harness has been
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kevin, for this video.
So here I have Mojaloop and our third-party services running in our integration test harness. This test harness has been updated to reflect the third-party API version 1.0.1. And here I have our command to run our functional tests in the Mojaloop testing toolkit. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this command. This command should generate a report file that we can then visit. And here we can see that all of our tests are currently passing.
That is it. It's a brief 45-second video. We go back to the presentation quickly. So this is what we envision for payment manager components to be included in the third-party flows. Is it okay? Is it agreeable? Okay. Yeah. Hopefully sorry for the delay there. So we have so for those of you familiar with how payment manager works, I'm sure a lot of deployments that are using these are familiar with this. So we have this is on the FSP side. So we have the FSP backends. And then we have so all this is on the periphery. We have the Mojaloop switch and Mojaloop connection manager server component that runs on the switch. And then several components that run on the FSP side, FSP boundary. To leverage the existing capabilities of the payment manager, for example, to securely set up connection, exchange CSRs and keys, to store not just the keys, but also some metrics, and provide user-friendly, use case-friendly APIs to the FSPs. So we have several components here, the management API, user interface experience API. So there are these components here in blue, third-party friendly FSP core connector. That is the one that we are aiming to develop as part of this. So our vision is that once we have this developed, we have a payment manager product that has, let's say, 3 modes. One is where it can be used by third-party implementers to configure it for them and deploy. And then FSPs to configure it and deploy for their use cases. And for FSPs that want to support third-party functionality as well. And then these connectors will be different for each of them, but they'll take care of the functionality and message transformation needed. So similarly, you can see here for the so similarly on the third-party side, we have a third-party friendly core connector. In this case, we are starting off with a specific connector for GSP API adapter, but it should serve as a template for any third-party API as well. And this way, we'll have end-to-end testing. We want to be able to trigger the use cases from the third-party implementer side. To start with, we are going to simulate the third-party implementation side with the testing toolkit. And once we have the end-to-end tests and end-to-end functionality, then Google will adopt that as well for their own implementation. We'll take questions at the end, but with that, as I was mentioning, the third-party team, I think, came up with a lot of good standards and best practices that were adopted across other teams as well. And one of them is the API snippets, which is now used for all of the Mojaloop APIs. Louis will give an update on API snippets. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be in another room with other human beings. And thank you, Sam. 2 critiques. One, Sam, you're dressed too nicely, and you're making us all look bad, especially the developers who should be able to get away with like a t-shirt and jeans. But thank you, Sam, for your intro, and thank you for your leadership of the 3PPR team. So yeah, I was asked to share a little bit about API snippets. We had, I think we've presented on it briefly in the past, but just to kind of go over it again and talk about some of the latest improvements and why we have it and what its purpose is. Mojaloop, across our different services, we have lots of different called microservices, which contain snippets of the different Mojaloop APIs. Mojaloop now has 4 or 5 APIs, and there's common interfaces that need to be shared between all of them. I'll give us an example in a few moments. So the idea being that we have a single source of truth for all of our API definitions, and we don't run into problems where APIs become out of sync with one another. It also then can lead into a common type system so that we have more strict type definitions. It makes it easier for us to build SDKs and tools on top of Mojaloop, and for other people to come along and integrate with what we're doing. So there is also a link there. I'll let you click on that in your own time if you'd like, that lets you browse through the definitions there. How do I click the thing? Do I click that one? Oh, it's there. It's not there. Okay. So just to talk about where did we come from and why did we re-implement it this way? in the 3PI example, we had to introduce a few new services, and we had an API that was moving really quite fast. And every time we made a revision, we have to make that single revision across 5 different places and hope that we got that revision accurate and we didn't make any errors in copying and pasting or the like. So here's an existing example update that we wanted to do. And this has actually happened not too long ago. We added extra currency codes for some test currencies supported by some international standards. So here we have a currency definition, and there's a long list of potential three-letter currency codes. Now, if you want to update the currency code across all of the Mojaloop services, across our 100 and something repos, you would need to go and open a pull request in the original specification, because that is the source of truth. Then you would need to copy this chunk of YAML specification, which is I think about 100 lines long, because there's like a single line for each currency code, maybe even more. And you'd need to copy it and paste it at least 10 times, probably more like 20 times, and hope that you don't make any mistakes, and hope that you don't miss out any of the specifications where we do refer to this currency code. And then you need to do a code review for each of those repositories. So that's definitely one way to do it. It can work in smaller projects, but we found that when we have been doing integration tests and end-to-end tests, this issue hit us really hard, because we would be writing a specification or writing a HTTP request, post request, that would work for one microservice but not the other one, because the specification wasn't synced up properly. And you could manually manage this as well, and there's certain benefits to doing that depending on your scale. But instead, we implemented API snippets, which is a single source of composable snippets of open API specifications. That's how I'm going to end that sentence. So instead of having 1,000 or 2,000 line long file that you edit, you have lots of little files that are easy to see, easy to manage, easy to code review. The process in this case is that you would navigate to the definition and add your new lines. You would then do a single code review and pull request, or pull request and code review. And depending on how it's set up, you could do an automatic version bump, or you could do that manually. Depends on some of the rules we might have around releases. And then for every service, you simply just update the version reference to the latest version of API snippets and install. So that takes a lot of the, it does move some of the issues to a different place, because now you have a common place where you can easily break all of your repositories if you're not careful. And that is one of the challenges with creating new dependencies like this. But you benefit by getting more consistency between all of your files, and you're not having to manually copy and paste and reconcile these sorts of definitions. Cool. That's all I have to really share on that one. And we had a bunch of other changes recently with the third-party API that Sam was talking about that made making these updates across 5 or so services really quite seamless and easy. Cool. Sam, hand back over to you.
Thanks, Luis. Very well said. So it would have taken like 4 or 5 times the effort to make some of the changes. So recently, Kevin was touching on that. We recently moved from version 1 to the next version 1.0.1. Make sure it's friendly for third-party connectors. And API snippets was the repo where all the changes had to be made instead of all the downstream repos. So we know that the third-party functionality in Mojaloop or feature opens up possibility for many other use cases. So we look at some of the roadmap items. I'll cover a couple of those briefly, and then we'll invite over Michael to talk about some more and show the stars in our hands. But so we want to continue developing an adapter for third party, specifically for the GSP API, which we believe is generic enough for any third party implementer. And the goal still remains that we want to have end-to-end testing done of third party functionality and make it adopter friendly. so that it's ready for any implementation who wants to adopt third-party functionality in the near future. Without taking too much time, I'll pass it on to Michael for the discussing rest of the roadmap items.
Thank you very much, Sam. Hello again. So this is really to talk about some proposed extensions to the third-party interface, which came out of our work with OpenIMIS that I was talking about yesterday. When we first started looking at this, it seemed clear that the right position for a health management system like OpenIMIS in relation to the Mojaloop switches in which it would be implemented would be as a third-party payment initiator. So the Mojaloop scheme would want to know about it and to regulate it, but it wouldn't itself have any financial position. It would have a relationship with DFSPs, with banks or possibly mobile money companies, and it would want to initiate payments, for instance, to settle invoices for operations or other procedures that have been carried out. So that was relatively simple. It started to essentially to use the same areas as we currently have in the third-party API. But then we started to dig a little bit deeper into the requirements, and some further requirements started to emerge. I want to talk about three of those. The first is the ability to request a bulk payment. Now, obviously, it's probably going to be the case that the health management system will run, let's say, at end of day, a list of all the invoices that it needs to pay, or possibly at end of week. And it will want to send a bulk request to the payment system to say, please pay all these invoices. So that's one thing. The second thing is a bulk request to support disbursements to large numbers of recipients. So for instance, we talked about examples yesterday where maternity grants are payable to a family which has just had a new baby. There might also be cases where disability pensions of various kinds that are administered by a health plan need to be paid. And typically those will be relatively large numbers of disbursements. So we expected that if we were to continue using the third-party interface, then that interface would need to have a bulk request to pay, which we don't currently have. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the ability to ask for a payment from the payee institution, sorry, from the payer institution, which is not an institution that the health management system currently has a relationship. So let's imagine a situation where the health plan has subscribers. People have to pay a regular subscription. And what would need to happen in that case, or what we would like to happen, is for the health management system to produce a list of subscriptions which are due and the identifiers which identify the people who need to pay them, and then to send reminders in the form of requests to pay to those people at their various institutions. So the request to pay will arrive at multiple DFSPs, and people will be given the chance to pay their subscription and to have the payment recorded. So that's the second reason for wanting to have bulk request to pay facilities in the third-party interface. The second thing that we thought we needed to be able to manage is the question of unsolicited payments. Now, in a situation where people subscribe to a health plan, we couldn't rely, the health management system could not rely on them always waiting to be reminded before they paid. They might very well want to, because they're in the bank or something like that, or because they have a particular time when they do these things, they might want to pay unsolicited. And we needed some way, we think, of capturing the fact that this was a bill payment and that it needed to be registered in the HMS as a subscription that had been paid. So that is the next one, and I'm now struggling to think of what the third one was. I knew this would happen. You said you said you'd give me a placeholder. Okay, we've got the bulk functionality. Oh, pay to, yeah, sorry, but that's pay to a recipient. So the way in which we thought of doing that was to have the payment sent by the subscriber to an identifier which the switch thought belonged to the third party payment. So the idea is you get told to pay to your subscription number, and the subscription number is registered in the Oracle as belonging to the third party interface. So the third party gets it, and then it knows that a payment is being made against that bill. Actually, this is just a particular instance of what is quite a general requirement in this area, which is bill payment. So when somebody pays a bill, they're not interested in whether the funds have been transferred to the electricity company or the government's account or not. What they're interested in is whether the government or the electricity company has registered that they've made the payment and credited it against their account with the utility or the government, whoever it might be. This is a variety of the same thing. Now, we've looked a couple of times at how we might incorporate this. We had a proposal, those of you with long memories will remember when we did some work on multi-part payments. One of the things we said is that we would allow an interface, but we imagine a situation in the future of Mojaloop where companies like utilities, electricity companies or government departments or whatever, may register with the scheme as third-party providers such that they can pay their bills, but also so that they can send reminders to people to pay their electricity bill or their taxes or whatever it might be, and so that they can record the fact that those taxes have been paid and send a confirmation back to the payer to say, yep, I got your thing and it's been taken off your electricity bill or your tax bill or your subscription to your health scheme. So those are the extensions that I think we want to look at the moment. Anyone have any questions on that? Oh, I'm amazed.
So I'll start with the simple question, which is, it's not clear to me that this is a 3 PPI function at all.
Mm-hmm.
This is a interface function that a commercial bank would provide to its customer.
Yep.
And the test that we should be applying to any kind of thing we do here in these interfaces is whether the national scale system should be providing this to 2,500 banks,
Mm-hmm.
or whether it should be providing it to the one customer that is in one bank, provides it to its one customer that wants this. The open IMIS system, there might be one, there might be two in a country. We don't need to convert all 2,500 banks to understand this API and to agree to it in the scheme contract. We would need to have one or two commercial banks be able to expose this functionality to their one or two customers, and then they can submit batches through the batch system were that to be a thing, or they could do other things. So it would seem to me that we should, as you've explored this with 3 PPI, we should now separately perhaps, or in parallel, explore this through the open API. What would GSMA's open API look like if you're doing this on mobile money? What would this look like using a typical over-the-top bank interface? And where's the gap? Why are we doing it in the center? And we're looking at the administrative boundaries. Why is the national scale system providing this functionality versus a targeted market opportunity for some bank to do this and compete with other banks to do it? That would be the first question that I would raise.
Okay. So apart from thanking you for a contribution as insightful as it is provocative, which of course goes without saying, let me see if I can, well, I'll outline the thought process that I went through, which led me to the idea that it might be better to do it via a 3PPI interface. And it was as follows. So you're right, we could provide those through an interface with DFSP, one or more DFSPs, because an individual health management system might easily have accounts at a number of banks and would want to, yeah, absolutely, for good reasons. Now, if we were to do it via the standard interface, sorry, this, through the standard bulk interface, which belongs to DFSPs, and have the health management system make that change for each implementation, then essentially what we would be saying is that for each interface, each implementation, the health management system, the open IMIS system, would need to set up a separate interface with one or more participant banks. Now, I think that you and I have slightly divergent views on the similarity of the interfaces and therefore of the ease with which that could be done. It's certainly been the case for us as well. I mean, if you look, for instance, at the flavors currently available of the open banking API, which was intended to offer a standard interface for people to interact with banks, as far as I recall, they are currently in the hundreds. So the chances of our being able to provide a standard way of interfacing for what is, after all, intended as a generic health management system, OpenIMIS, seemed to me relatively small. So I thought, well, what if we changed it round and say, as far as the health management system is concerned, the interface is always the same. It's the standard interface to a third party. Then all you're saying is that in Mojaloop schemes which want to implement an interface with an open IMIS, the banks which might act as bankers for the health management system would need to take on board the third-party API, as we currently understand it. That might be a way for banks to offer additional services. It might be a site of competition, but it seemed to me that overall it was likely that the additional cost of doing things in that way was likely to be lower than it would otherwise be.
I think not. And the reason is not for those that did the work. The benefits clearly flow to them. It's for those that didn't need to do it, but now have to do it. So in the descriptions that you gave, the payment system will now be directing bulk payment traffic and requirements to potentially any DFSP in the system, some of which have no intention of supporting bulk payments in the first place. It's just not their business model. And yet they have to be ready to accept those and do something with them. At least they have to say, I don't support that, which of course now is a backfeed to the same problem you're trying to overcome, which is how do I just construct a payment message and have it work? I would prefer to see this thought through first as a problem of standardization versus not standardization, which you raised. You say, look, there could be hundreds of these so-called open banking APIs. Let's not even call them that. Let's say they're over-the-top APIs. Every bank has its own. Let's start with that condition. They can then compete for business based on how easy it is to onboard to it and how functional it is.
Yeah.
And if those two things aren't acceptable, then they don't get the business. And so there's a market competition for how good you can do that and offer that service. Commercial banks that are interested in that business will do it. MMOs probably won't, and MFI certainly won't. So you're going to end up with the hospital or whoever it is that's using OpenIMIS selecting an appropriate commercial partner who's a member of the Mojaloop scheme so that they can initiate the appropriate kinds of payment functions that they want through that interface. And then those then map down to the much smaller and much clearer set of individual steps that the payment system can implement within the scheme.
I think, oh, sorry, have you...
Yeah, no, but I mean, I think that's the the more traditional view that we would take is that what we said originally when designing the Mojaloop system was simplify the set of things that the national scale system needs to do without denaturing the commercial business that sits on the outside.
Sure.
So for instance, we don't do campaign management for bulk payments. You can send a batch in and we'll process the batch and give you a common answer, but we're not going to do all the campaign management for you. So we'll give you the tools to do it, but there's still a company that has to go through and manage that thing.
Sure.
I think it begs the question to do some of the things you're describing within the scheme for another reason. And that is that if you do it for IMIS, you have to do it for other things too that aren't IMIS. Because you're saying this is the way we react to these kinds of large scale, could be over the top things that we decide to do within our core interfaces. We start drilling holes in the architecture to support them. So I think that's a risk.
Yeah, so I want to, I won't say push back, but I want to offer a critique of some of that. So I think that the way in which this would work is that the only institutions, the only participants in the scheme who would need to know about the third-party side of the interface are the debtor participants, i.e. the ones with whom the health management system has a relationship and which own the accounts which are to be debited. The credit institutions will simply receive bulk payment requests in exactly the same way they would in the other system. Sorry, if it were to come through the standard interface. So there would be no difference there. All that would happen is this provides another way for the bulk payment, sorry, for the debtor institution, the bank, to receive a list of the payments which it is required to make.
Yeah, that's the challenge I have. So it's not third party, and yet we're using the third party payments interface. That's the challenge. I don't have a problem with bulk. Offering a bulk payment interface and saying this is the way you present batch payments to your common single institution, that's fine. I get that. And there's a need for that in some fashion. We did have something. I think we could be improved. But this is using a third-party payment interface where it's not a third party. I mean, they're actually the party. And they use their facilitating bank, which their money is sitting. But they're using a third-party interface that the entire scheme has to have knowledge of and process as an intermediary instead of commanding their bank to do something and the bank does it.
Well, one of the ways in which we design the third-party interface is that it should be capable of working in a situation in a scheme where possibly a large number of participants were not interested in it and did not want to support it. So that's why, for instance, when we go through the account linking process, we ask the switch for a list of institutions that will support it. So it would only be a small number of institutions which would need to support it. And they are exactly the same set of institutions as the ones that would need to support the bulk inputs if they were to be made in some other way. There is no difference between them. My worry there, well, the difficulty that I have is, I guess, that I'm not seeing the conceptual difference between a third party like MCOPA making a request for a single payment via its bank and a request, and MCOPA making a request for a bulk a set of payments from its subscribers. In both cases, what we're doing, sorry, just want to say, in both cases, what we're doing is moving the requirement to specialize the interface to the company, to the institution that gets the benefit of it.
But I think that the difference we have to strike here is that 3PPI was intended for third parties to initiate payments between the other two parties.
Yes.
But that's not what you're describing. In all of these cases, the payment initiator is the second party or the first party, never the third party. There is no third party.
Well,
it's their money on the sending side or their money on the receiving side. They're a merchant. They're not anything else. They're either a single payer bulk payer or they're a merchant who's receiving money. That makes them a second party. They're not, or the first party, but they're not a third party. Since they're using a third party interface, a third party is Google Pay wallet. or it's some other wallet that is not a party to the transaction.
Right.
They are simply setting up a transaction to occur between two other parties, one of which they may know and one of which they don't know, but it's not their money and it's not their account.
No, it's not. And it's not.
Right. So it's a bit of a torquing of the interface
Okay.
to a circumstance that it wasn't really intended to support. Now, the challenge we have with doing that isn't that it won't work. You've described it very well. I understand how it would. It's that it won't always work. It works today because of how you've described it. Eventually, 3PPI will diverge through other uses, and where you're not talking about merchants, you're now talking about two third parties, and you now have this kind of diverging needs. And you'll always have to support this other case where you won't necessarily want that to be within the realm of functions that are available for third parties, but they are available when you're actually a merchant using this interface for this other purpose.
What kind of functions might they be?
When I look
Sorry, guys, I've been chewing again. It's outrageous.
Well, so I guess we have to wrap it up, but I would have said that there's more work here, and it's not because you didn't explain it well, you did. I just don't think, I don't see that it's necessarily the appropriate use of the API services as we've described them. But I also don't want to lose the work that was done in thinking through this particular circumstance.
Sure.
There's something in here, and it may be that what we're really after is standardization. And
Yes.
that's not necessarily the reuse of 3PPI, which happened to be super close to what you wanted. It's that there's a need for standardization that kind of looks like this, but it's for another purpose.
I agree. I think I now understand more clearly, because I'm a bit slow on these things, where the heart of your objection is. And you're right. We should think about this and talk about it and see if we can come up with a good answer.
Okay, fair enough. But thank you. I'm very glad it was presented as tightly as it was. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Miller, for the question. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Google Mojaloop Foundation and the BMGF for being closely involved and also funding this work for the benefit of the community and financial inclusion. Thank you, Simeon. We'll pass it on to you.